Hi everyone, good morning. At the beginning, I would kindly ask all the participants to mute the microphone and to shut down the cameras, if it's possible. And others that they are waiting can be connected due to the webinar. Okay, we can start. Hi, my name is Emina Mravovic, and I'm project manager at Energies Association. Really, it is a great pleasure to be here with you and to have the opportunity to announce a webinar on urban mobility. The webinar will be presented in front of Urban Innovation Vienna, Mr. Gerald Franz, who has more than 10 years of experience in the field of the sustainable mobility. In Urban Innovation Vienna, Mr. Gerald is in the charge of mobility management in the urban development areas of Vienna. Also, he established a mobility department and supervised mobility at the Energy and Environmental Agency in Austria. Shortly, through this webinar, we will mention the topics of electric mobility and electric charging station in Vienna as example of good practice. This will show a real example of the development and implementation of electric mobility, given that Vienna is known as a pioneer in the development of smart city solution. So I profoundly believe we are all excited to hear what Mr. Gerald has to say. So Mr. Gerald, you can start your presentation.
Thank you very much for introducing me. I will share my presentation. I hope you can see the screen.
Yes, we can see it. Great.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I say hello from Vienna. It's a nice sunny day today. I hope in your country too. I would love to travel there, but you know, as it's in pandemic, we have pandemic times. It's not possible. But on the other hand, it's a great opportunity and also an advantage to connect easily like this via electronic possibilities. So it's a real pleasure to talk here to you today about the best practice of electric mobility in the city of Vienna. I would like to present the content for today's presentation. I have quite some points and some different topics prepared. I would love to introduce you to my organization, then as a starting point, talk about e-mobility in the city of Vienna, give you some facts and figures, what we do, what the situation is about. Then I would like to talk to you about some implemented projects, give a short introduction into e-mobility and corporate mobility management, as well as e-mobility and private use. And in the end of my presentation, I also would like to talk a bit about some research projects, some research and advising we do concerning e-mobility in the future, and then end with some conclusions. And hopefully we have a nice discussion at the end of the presentation. First off, I would like to start very briefly. Urban Innovation is a company owned by the city of Vienna. We are divided into 3 departments. As already mentioned, we are following smart city goals, and therefore we have a smart city agency incorporated in our organization. We have Future Cities Department, which is doing research on future urban topics, and my department where I work in is the Energy Center. We are dealing with a transformation of energy and mobility patterns for the future in the city of Vienna. Here you find some topics we are dealing with. So it's about digitalization of the city. It's about urban development. new housing project, affordable housing projects, how to make the city more climate friendly and energy efficient. We also talk about cities economy, smart governance, and of course the topic of future mobility, how to transform our traffic and mobility system for the future to make it more livable. I would like to start with this picture. Electric mobility is not something really new. When we talk about electric mobility, we normally talk about electric cars, but indeed electric mobility is very old form of how the transport system is created in the city. So we have tramways, we have metros. So as you can see, it's a history more than 100 years old. So as a first stepstone, I would say the most important backbone of a city's electric mobility system is the public transport system. So this is also where the efforts of city planning goes to further strengthen metro lines, public transport lines, train lines, electric buses, and so on. But of course, it's not the the only solution we can follow, because as you know, the road traffic is still one of the major pollutants in our cities. It's the same story all over Europe. The car traffic is responsible for about 2/3 of CO2 emissions in our countries and in our cities, and that's it's a real topic and also a real challenge, because as you know, the European Union follows targets on how to cut greenhouse gas emissions and to cut CO2 emissions. So maybe you followed it, the existing target of reducing 40% of our CO2 emissions until 2030 was sharpened within the last weeks, and the new goal is to reduce CO2 emissions of 55% compared to our values of 1990 until 2030. So that's a real challenge, and the most complicated area or field is the traffic sector, and that's where electric mobility becomes a very important aspect. So therefore, the whole transport system has to be electrified, or another form of fuels have to be found. But with our fossil fuel system, it's not possible to fulfill these goals. So as you can see, a lot of other vehicles are going to be electrified within the next future, and it already began. If you're talking about scooters, if you're talking about electric bikes, motorbikes, and of course cars. And what lies behind all that? Why are the OEMs, or the car manufacturers, so very keen on reducing CO2 emissions and building electric cars, electric vehicles? The solution is they have to do it. The European Union gives them CO2 fleet limits that they have to fulfill. So now in 2021, it's 95 grams per kilometer for new cars. In the future, until 2030, it's even a lot lower. It's 59 grams. So the car manufacturers have to really invest in their fleet and to develop electric cars. For us, the electric mobility system of the future, so it's called X.0. I don't know which step it will be, but the system will be a lot more connected than it is now. So it's not only replacing normal cars, private cars, by electric cars. The future lies within connecting all those forms of transport, public transport, individual transport, and use new forms of digitalization such as MaaS, mobility as a service, to combine these forms of transport and also follow the lead of not only possessing a vehicle, but also in new forms of using it, such as sharing models and so on. Then I come to the next point. I talk a bit about the city of Vienna and the actual status quo. We now have 1.9 million inhabitants, and the city is further growing. And the challenge is to keep the number of registered cars as low as possible. Of course, it's rising, but fortunately, it's not so much rising as the population number is. So at the moment, we have about 700,000 cars registered. That means about 376 cars per 1,000 inhabitants. In 2020, about 6,000 electric cars were licensed, and we can see as from numbers from this year that, for example, in February, almost 10% of the newly licensed cars already were electric cars. But for us, still the backbone, as I said, of all mobility system is public transport. We had about 966 million passengers in public transport in 2019, and about 850,000 sold annual tickets. So we have more annual ticket holders for public transport than car owners, which is quite remarkable and a nice number. On the right side, you see the modal split of our city. So 38% of all travels done are done by public transport, 28% by foot, 7% by bike, and 27%, so a little bit more than a quarter, are done by private car. And this number is quite stable, so it's kind of difficult to reduce the number of car use. Then a little bit or some information about the urban development of our city. So there are still a lot of large-scale projects planned in housing. On the one hand, you see these stars. They all represent some kind of urban development areas, smaller and larger ones. But the fact is that in 2028, we will have about 2 million inhabitants. So that means about 11,000 to 12,000 new inhabitants a year. And so we can not only build new houses and new development areas, we also have to strengthen our public transport system. So there are also planned new metro lines, new tram lines, new train lines, which you can see on this map below. How do we steer our mobility goals? There are some important documents and strategies we are following. So we have an urban development plan, which is oriented until 2025. We have a smart city framework strategy with very concrete and precise goals, which are followed until 2030 and furthermore until 2050. We have also an urban mobility plan, a sustainable urban mobility plan for Vienna, which is part of the urban development plan. And we also have a small e-mobility strategy, which goes hand in hand with the urban mobility plan. And what is included in this e-mobility strategy, it's that the city wants to focus on charging infrastructure on the one hand, but it's not focusing on enforcing electric car mobility, it's still important to keep a city of short distances, which means we want to reduce travels by private motorized transport and give priority to green mobility, to forms of green mobility. The most important one, as I said, public transport and other forms of transport. And the central objective is to enable mobility without owning a private car. Modal split targets until 2025 means 80% of all travels should be done by green forms of mobility and 20% by private car. And at least 10% of this car travels should be electric within 2025. It's also important to switch city logistics and vehicle fleets of companies to electric mobility. I will talk to that a little bit later. And it's also important to adapt laws and regulations that are within the hand of the city, such, for example, building laws, garage laws, which include also the integration of electric mobility where it's needed. I would love to give you some numbers about electric cars in Vienna and in Austria, and how they developed. Electric cars still account for a small proportion of all newly registered vehicles. But what is interesting that the number is growing very fast. So we can see from 2015 until 2019, the number of electric cars in the city rose steadily. In 2019, we had a total of almost 9,000 electric cars licensed in the city. Alone in 2020, 6,245 new electric cars came on top. And what we can see from 2021, the development is even stronger. Same story in the whole of Austria, so that the number is growing. And if you look on the right side on this graph, you can see different countries and its number of registrations of electric cars. This was the number from 2019. New numbers show that the same thing as in Vienna and in Austria, the numbers are rising. The leaders at the moment are Germany, Norway, and Great Britain in terms of licensed electric cars. But as you also can see, the number is still very low. It's in the city now, about 3% of all cars licensed are electric cars. So still a large potential to growth. Some more numbers here. Also, you can see that the percentage of electric cars in different European countries is still low. Here you can see some of the leaders: Sweden, Netherlands, Great Britain, Denmark are on the forefront of the total amount of electric cars within their private car fleets. And what is maybe interesting also, here we have some kind of expectance or prognosis from the development of electric cars within the next future, which is also which was calculated by an organization called Austria Tech and also proved by car manufacturers. So these are realistic numbers. And as we can see, then the curve is now about to rise, but then it's going to rise exponentially. So we can see that, for example, in 2027, so in a bit more than 5 years, we will have about 50% of all new licensed cars will be electric cars. So this is number that is really impressive, I would say, and in about 20 years, almost every new licensed car will be an electric car. So therefore, it's really very important to think about how to charge those cars, how to build a charging infrastructure that is sufficient for these new needs. So the municipal energy provider Wien Energie was became the offer to build about 1,000 charging points until 2020, which is now finished. And when you come to the city, you can find all these kind of charging stations all over the city where it's possible to charge 2 electric cars. You always have 2 charging. You can see here on public territory, but it's equally important to build e-charging infrastructure also in semi-public and private places such as garages, public garages, and also private garages, because it's not the intention of the city to build all over charging stations, which is a high amount of costs that are needed for that. And also we want to bring as many cars as possible into garages and take them away from public ground where it's possible. So it's more for the areas of the city where it's not possible to build any other form of charging infrastructure because there are, for example, no garages because it's very old buildings. Some more figures about the charging infrastructure, not only in Vienna, but also in the whole country. New form of charging points are established. Here we see a map from 2019 where you could find about 5,000 public accessible charging points all over the country. What is important to establish roaming between the different operators, that you don't need for every charging operator an own card or registration. So it's already possible between different operators such as Wien Energie and the Law Austrian EVN. And some more facts on that. In some cities, you have free parking for electric cars if you have a green plate. And for the charging infrastructure, you have different tariffs depending on the charging speeds. Normally it's 11 kilowatt hours, which is a lower number of charging. You need more time, but it's cheaper until 50 kilowatt hours. We call it superchargers, such as Smart Tricks, which is an operator, a national. It's more expensive, but you can charge your car faster. Some expectations that could be maybe interesting. If we have about 10% electric cars licensed until 2030, it means 3.2% more electricity for the country. If all cars become electric, so the whole fleet, it would mean about 28% more electricity needed for the country. Then I would love to make a small excursus of some how we try to promote other forms of electric mobility, not only the electric car itself. We have something called like Green Electricity Fund in the city. It's called in German Ökostromfonds. On the one hand, we are funding fossil fuel in innovative mobility solutions in residential buildings. There we subsidize sharing vehicles such as electric cars for sharing, and also two-wheel vehicles such as pedelecs, cargo bikes. This subsidy is oriented towards real estate developers and housing companies. And on the other hand, we are subsidizing e-cargo bikes for companies. Requirement is that they have the headquarters and the main field of work in the city of Vienna, so they can get for a cargo bike 2,000 euros, and for larger cargo bikes, which are oriented into more transportation capacity, over 100 kilograms, you can get about 4,000 euros of subsidy, and this is really requested subsidy. So we already we have about 1 million euros for that support, and I think within this years it will be completed, because there is a lot of interest in this kind of subsidy. Then something different and maybe interesting as well. We not only try to bring those forms of new mobility to companies and to the housing areas itself. It's also important for us to create mobility points on public ground, which is linking public transport in the city with sharing possibilities. So you have different spots. We call it Wien Mobilstation mobility point, where you can find electric cars, bike rentals, bike boxes, information terminal, and so on, within the city. So at the moment we have about 10 such stations installed. And it's also important and very tricky task to implement it together with an integrated mass system, mobility as a system, which means that different mobility operators work together, and they can they offer the people to use one platform, digital platform, to book and to pay for all those offers. And the goal is to establish 100 of such mobility stations all over the city until 2025. Here you can see such a station which was installed in a new urban development area, the Nordbahnhof, the former Northern train station, which is a huge housing project. There the tram line was prolonged, and you can see on the left side this mobility station where you find 3 different cars that transport a normal combi car and an electric car, and charging station for the inhabitants there to their use. And this station is operated also by Wiener Linien, the Viennese transport operator. Okay, then I would like to continue and give you some information about electric mobility and corporate mobility management and advantages for companies and how it's done in Austria. So it's important that companies convert their fleets and make it more CO2 friendly or CO2 reduced, I would say. And that can be done for company cars as well as commercial vehicles. Advantages would be the company is strengthens its corporate social responsibility. It's saving costs, also maintenance costs for the cars. There are high subsidies and investment grants in the country for that matter at the moment. As a company, you can save taxes. You have to pay less taxes if you change your car to an electric car, and you also can save as an employee in-kind payments for your company car if you are willing to drive an electric car. But on the other hand, there are some doubts still about doing this. It's on the one hand about the residual book value of the car, so there is some unknown information about because the car market for used electric cars is not so established yet, and on the other hand, there are doubts about the range of electric cars and also about the acceptance of users of car users. And when it comes to commercial fleets, there are doubts if there are adequate models for transports things on the market yet. But there, as I said, is a great opportunity as a company. If you do so, you get for an electric vehicle 5,000 euro subsidy. For a transporter, you get until 12,500 euros of subsidy. For a charging station, 600 euros, and for scooters, you get up to 800 euro. And on the other hand, a new form of grant is given by the government. It's called investment grant in order to make your company more energy and efficient and climate friendly, which is connected to the COVID subsidies, and you can get as a company from 7 until 14% of your investment as an investment grant, which is a very nice number, and you get a lot of money if you now as a company change your fleets to electric. One big challenge for companies is how to charge their fleets if they change their cars to electric cars, and there is still some missing knowledge, I would say, about how to do so. So it's important to have an electrician of your trust who is installing this charging infrastructure, and it's also about the net capacity. So it's not for every company possible to install it, but there are a lot of different opportunities from a very simple wall box, which costs up to 2,000 euros, where you can charge your cars easily, but it takes a little bit longer. Then the next step would be to have a charging column or a charging point for more cars, which is a bit more expensive, as you can see on the right side from Schrack. And then, but this is not a company thing; it's more a state or a government incentive to install supercharging facilities all over the country, where you can charge all types of electric cars in a very short time, which is more expensive logically because those stations are very expensive to establish, but they will be needed for the future to change our mobility systems, as I said. Then you have Tesla, which has its own system, the Tesla supercharger, which at the moment gives the opportunity to Tesla drivers and users. They can charge their cars for free and do that in a very short time as well. But this Tesla supercharging system is only usable for Tesla drivers. Then I come to the point, as I already said, talk about e-mobility and private use. So we can see that now the moment has come where battery electric vehicles are about to lift off. So we can see it in our country, but also in our neighboring countries, especially Germany, that there are still a lot of doubts about electric cars, but now it's the time where the sales of electric cars are going up a lot. So as you can see here, some numbers of Volkswagen. In 2019, they sold about 45,000 electric cars, fully electric cars. In 2020, this number already triplicated, and I expect that in 2021 it will be a lot higher again. So there are these old challenges of electric mobility, such as range, but you have new models and you have really extended range for different types of cars. You have the price questions, but you get good subsidies in all Austria, and of course you have the charging situation, and the charging situation depends a lot on where you live. If you have your own house where you can easily install charging infrastructure, it's more easy to buy an electric car than if you live in an apartment and there's no possibility to charge your car. And of course you have some aspects about sustainability of battery packs, but my opinion is that, or my impression is that this fact is a bit neglected, because it's even more important to reduce CO2 emissions than to think about the sustainability of resources, which is very important. But yeah, it's a hard thing to weigh off which aspect is more important. And then I would like to talk a bit about popular models and more about to come. What you can see is that within the last years, the market of electric cars developed really fast, and there are a lot of models on the market now. It was very different about 2 or 3 years ago, and you can see that the most popular cars in 2019 and 2020 were, of course, the Tesla Model 3, which was kind of an incubator for the whole topic of electric cars, I would say. And on the other hand, the classical car manufacturers such as Renault, Nissan, Volkswagen, which have their own cars such as the Zoe, the Nissan Leaf, the electric Golf, which were the forerunners, I would say, within the last years. But this year some new models came on the market which are, I would say, game changer within the market of electric cars, such as the ID.3 from Volkswagen, which is about to become the new Volkswagen Golf, the most popular electric car at its time, maybe. And also other manufacturers such as Skoda, the Enyaq, which is kind of very equivalent to a normal SUV, but with a more modern form of technology. So it's a market which is changing a lot and growing really fast. Then I come to the last section of my presentation, talk a bit about the future of electric mobility, and I would love to talk a bit about some pilot projects we are doing and we were doing in the city of Vienna. 2 projects you can find on this slide. The first one, we did a project called E-Mobility Scenario 2030. Therefore, we installed wall boxes in an apartment building together with the housing company, which is a social housing company. So it's quite cheap rentals for the users in an apartment building which is oriented on the fringe of the city, so in a more southern part. And the question was, is the power capacity of the building sufficient for 30% of inhabitants using electric mobility? So a share of 30% electric mobility was simulated. Therefore, 30% of inhabitants they got an electric car for a time period of 6 weeks, and they had only to use this electric car, and they had to charge in the house. So we observed the charging behavior, and we follow track if the power capacity of the building is sufficient for doing so. And what we saw is that it was sufficient, because the use of electricity is very anti-cyclical. The car is loaded during the night, where you don't use other forms of electricity because you're sleeping. And on the other hand, we installed a charging management system, which was possible to charge one car after the other during the night without using too much electricity at the same time, which is kind of the bottleneck within charging in housing garages. And then we followed track with this project, and we left the charging infrastructure there and installed an e-car sharing project within this the same garage. The inhabitants from the house were able to use this electric Golf, you can see here, for a very attractive price. So it's really cheap to do so, and also the neighboring houses were asked to use this electric car if they needed it. So they got a key for the garage, and they registered it with the operator, which is Porsche Bank Europcar. They formed their own sharing brand called Share2. And what we can see there is that it's not really used, because almost every inhabitant, they have their own car or cars, and it's really cheap to park your car on the street. So it's on the periphery of the city. And what we also wanted to see if charging, if sharing models are used not only within the city center but also in the city's periphery. What we can see now that the car is not really highly used, even if the prices of these cars are low. Some other projects linking electric driving with new forms of technology. On the one hand, on the right side, you can see an electric autonomous bus which is driving in the Seestadt Aspern, which is a very huge urban development area in Vienna on its northeastern borders, I would say. And this bus is driving around in a circle electrically and autonomous, which is a test from the Wiener Linien, the city's transport company. And on the left lower side, you see a project which is done in Berlin. It's called the Berlkönig. It's a cooperation between Daimler-Benz and ViaVan, which is an operator for on-demand ride-sharing projects. These are buses that can be booked by passengers for an attractive price, and it's some kind of model between public transport and taxi. So it brings you to places within a city where the public transport does not go, but it's fixed stops, and more possible users can book this car at the same time. So it's cheaper than a normal taxi company. And what we can see from different cities all over the world, this is also a form of transport that is growing rapidly, and we are planning to do a test on on-demand ride-sharing as well in the city within the next years. Then a very technical-oriented kind of project is called the ASCR. It's also implemented in the Seestadt Aspern, the urban development area I talked. It's called the Aspern Smart City Research. There, the company uses real data from users and inhabitants of this area, and they try to test how electric cars can be integrated into a smart grid, vehicle-to-grid system. So the idea is that future electric cars can be used as an energy storage for renewable energy. So the electricity is produced via photovoltaics on the roofs, and the cars can store it and give back electricity and use it if needed. So the capability of bidirectional charging is tested there within this project. So slowly I come to some kind of conclusions within my presentation. For us, it's important to view the whole mobility system and mobility management in the city in its as a whole picture, and its meta picture, I would say. And you can see that if you look at different aspects of mobility, such as parking, such as logistics and delivery services, if it goes to different form of transport, you can see that electrification of the transport system is becoming more and more important. On the one hand, you have electric private cars, you have, of course, the public transport, which is already electric, you have sharing mobility, which connects electricity and electric mobility, you have e-bikes, e-cargo bikes, scooters, you need the charging infrastructure and housing, so everything is connected and very dependent on the electrification of the transport sector. So what is important? It's important to know that 80% of our daily trips, they start and they end at your own home. So it's very essential to think about how to charge the private car if you make it electric. Electric cars are generally charged where they are parked for a long period of time. For example, at home, at your work, and in park and ride garages. And therefore, some technical and organizational requirements must be clarified, and also legal problems or challenges have to be clarified, such as the right to plug. For example, now it's you need the acceptance of all owners of an apartment in one house if you want to install charging infrastructure, which is very complicated, and limitations to further develop electric mobility. And within the historical center, where you have no or few garages, you need public infrastructure, as I showed, for the people to be able to use electric mobility as well. And my last slide, how do we prepare for such a multimodal mobility future? On the one hand, the private and corporate e-mobility is an important part of a future mobility system. So we see that you get a wider range of cars, of different car models. The range of the cars is already extended and price is about to drop. But on the other side, you have this challenge of the charging situation, also the sustainability of the battery production and reuse, as I said. Therefore, it's not useful to only replace normal cars by electric cars. You also have to think about a vision of how sharing mobility could be strengthened. Therefore, it's important to make mobility more affordable for everyone and to provide a fair distribution of public space with green zones in the city, and not only have parked cars all over the city, but do some new offers such as mobility stations, as I showed you, where people can use different forms of electric mobility, but they don't have to possess it. And the most important one, e-mobility is, in particular, can make the city more livable, because they produce less noise emissions and, of course, less or new greenhouse gas emissions, which is the most incremental or important thing to reduce our CO2 emissions and to reach the climate goals for the future. Yeah, that was my presentation here. You can find my contact data. I think you get the presentation afterwards as well. And yeah, I'm open for a discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerald, for this great presentation. It was very useful for us, considering that our country, Bosnia and Herzegovina, is a beginner in developing the electromobility. So, of course, these good examples are really needed for the all institutions and stakeholders that they are bonding these subjects regarding the electromobility. I will start with the questions. We have some questions, so I will read it, and if I can kindly ask you to answer. The first guest is Mr. Alexander. The question is, who is paying for building of that e-mobility infrastructure, City of Vienna? And are those charging for cars free? You just connect and charge, or there is a system for paying charged energy?
Yeah, it's not the city is paying, but the charging operator or the electricity operator called Wien Energie is paying for the infrastructure, and they are the monopolist operator on the other hand. So for them, it's hopefully a future business model to have those public charging infrastructure installed. And it's not free. You pay different prices for different forms of charging. As I said, if you want a fast charge, it's more expensive than if you charge in a longer period of time. And there are different forms of packages as well. If you're a frequent customer, you can pay an amount monthly and then use and pay less for the use of the energy and so on. So it's a different kind of packages and business models for different types of users.
Okay, I hope that Mr. Alexander is satisfied with the answer. We will go with Mr. Boyan from GIZ. The question is, are there charging stations at regular pumping station as they possess the big networks of stations through the country?
I have to read this question again because I didn't get it. Can you repeat it?
Yes, of course. Are the charging stations at regular pumping station as they possess the big networks of stations through the country?
No, they are not installed there. So they are on other places. So within the city, it's always on public ground. So it's normally oriented and frequently visited places such as normal parking spots, and all over the country it's very different. Sometimes it's a garage, sometimes it's on a marketplace of a village, but it's, I would say, never on regular pumping stations because those operators are, yeah, they don't want to have it, but I guess they soon will start to transform their own pumping stations into having electric charging stations as well. That is my expectation.
Okay, the next question is Nermina, Miss Nermina from City of Sarajevo. She said that it's a great presentation. Sarajevo is far from Vienna in this process, but we can learn a lot from your experience, of course. We made a huge step by adopting the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan for Canton and the city of Sarajevo. But we still have a specific challenge with all governance levels in Sarajevo, Canton city municipalities. Do you maybe have advice on what approach to take to have systematic integrated solutions and not random solutions that they are not connected, which is usually the case when individual institutions, organizations are working in parallel? What's the best way to bring everyone in one line of the process, which would be the most beneficial for Sarajevo?
I mean, that's a hard one. It's a very interesting, but also a very difficult question. I mean, as I said on one of my slides there, we have some kind of strategies and processes within the city that are complicated because it means management of expectations and policy management as well, but then at the end it's worth it, which means creating a smart city framework strategy where you have different stakeholders and also goals defined, and then you break it down to different levels, policy levels that you want to follow, such as here the urban development plan, the sustainable urban mobility plan, where all political stakeholders in the end agree on one common process and very detailed and precise goals you want to reach for the future. But even in Vienna, it's difficult because then you have a new government and suddenly maybe some political orientations are going more on one or the other side. But if you have those plans, strategies, it's very helpful to stay on track, I would say.
Okay, thank you. I see raised hands, guys, but I will come to you as soon as I read all the questions. Mr. Boyan, again from GIS. Are there any city subsidies or incentives for using the EVs either for private citizens or company fleets?
No, not really. So as I said, it's more for us. It's more important that people are following a multimodal form of transport patterns. So we want to give them the opportunity to use public transport easily, as well as those mobility stations. But there are no special subsidies to promote electric vehicles, because that's what we don't want, that everybody is just replacing the car by an electric car. So that's for the private side. So you have these government subsidies that are given, and they also usable for private users. That's the numbers I showed you. So for example, for buying an electric car, you can get up to 5,000 euro. That's not only for companies, but also for private persons. But for companies, we want to establish a special offer of mobility management to do some kind of consolation and awareness raising in the future. This is still a field that is not very intensively worked on. So you have other cities such as Munich, for example. They do a lot for company mobility management. That's there we are at the starting point, I would say.
Okay, next question, Halima Hodzic. How is the city addressing the increasing energy demand due to large share of e-cars? Perhaps not significant at the moment, but will surely be in a couple of years.
Yeah, it's going hand in hand with making our energy system more renewable and energy enforcing forms of green electricity, which is also a tricky one because it's also depending on new laws such as the energy efficiency law or the ecologic electricity law in Austria. But this is a very important aspect indeed. And in Vienna, for example, we are now on the forefront of making this electricity sector much more sustainable, for example, by some kind of obligation, for example, to install photovoltaics on all new buildings and to reduce the use of gas within private households. So it's going in a different process, but those are processes that are really highly connected.
Okay. And one more question: how about transit roads? Where could chargers be found?
You have the highways, the transit roads, the autobahn. There you can find chargers. I would say all if in distances smaller than 50 kilometers. You have different operators. It's not very intuitive. So sometimes you have to leave the highway and then charge somewhere. So it's not yet a perfect network, but you always can find something. So sometimes it's a supermarket that a supermarket company that provides charging. Sometimes it's the highway operator, but you always can find something. And there is normally you have some kind of apps and where you can look those charging stations up on your phone, but you also have built it in the car, and in the navigation system, it always shows you the next charging point about to come.
Okay, now I will give a word for Mrs. Anela Karahasan. She is Director of Association of Electromobility in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So we can hear her point of view.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emina. Just small correction. I'm not director. I'm senior association for the Association of Electromobility. So before, first of all, good afternoon to everyone. So as Emina announced me, I am Anela Karahasan. Mr. Franz, many thanks for this great presentation. I have two questions. I avoid to write in chat because everything now is online, everything is written in chat, so at least we can communicate on this way and see each other. But before I ask these two questions, I feel obligated to make some small introduction to Association of Electromobility, which exists in the Chamber of Economy of Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I'm honored to be here to represent our association today. And our association is currently the only association of this type that exists in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we gather many members from the private companies to the public companies, and the number of these members is going day by day to be larger. In short time, we done many activities, and I'm very honored that we also in December last year organized a webinar on the topic electromobility in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which also was supported by many international organizations such as CBRD, GIZ, IFC, and so on. So, Mr. Franz, many thanks for this presentation. I will be very glad to also get in touch with you to share your experience and knowledge and what we can do and improve in order to improve electromobility in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I will please Emina for sharing our contacts and to share presentation. My first question is related to the percentage, actually to ratio of public and private electrical station that you have in Vienna. And the second question is, in your opinion, what is the greater obstacles to develop more electromobility in Vienna? Thank you.
Thank you for your great questions. So, yeah, I really would love to stay in contact, that's for sure. And it's really an important thing, I would say, to have such organizations developed for your country. In Austria, we have such organizations as well, such as the National Initiative for Electric Mobility, or an association which is dealing with connecting different charging operators and have some integrated system of charging possibilities. So it's really very important to have those organizations and to do some awareness raising, because for most people and for most companies and most stakeholders, it's a very new topic, and there are so many question marks and so many open questions on the one hand, and on the other hand, the topic is developing really, really fast. So that's the challenge, I would say. Concerning your questions, I mean, the exact percentage I cannot tell you. I know that we have 1,000 charging points in the city on public ground now, which is for sure not sufficient, and it's a number that is very carefully chosen, because we don't, as I said, want to have all those parked cars charge their cars on the road. So it should be more a measure for visitors of the city, or people who really don't have another possibility to charge their car. But we want to have a much larger number of charging spots on private ground. The difficult thing is we don't know where it's already fulfilled or where it's already established, because those are private information, and maybe you can track it down with some kind of building and construction measures, but at the moment we don't have an exact number. The more difficult thing is that the construction companies and real estate developers, they are still doubtful if it's really needed to install charging infrastructure. They say, because they are thinking in the old system of gas stations, and they say pumping stations, yeah, normally you have to fill your car somewhere else, but not in your own home. And for them, it's difficult to understand that the electric mobility will really come, and will come fast. And then for many people, it will be a big question how to charge the car. I can tell it from my own experience that in our house, in our building, you have a garage, but you don't have the possibility to charge your cars, and still already people are asking for charging possibilities, and it's very complicated, as I said, for legal and cost and organizational matters. So, but ideally, I would say that only a small percentage is provided on public ground, and the rest should be on private ground. And for the obstacles, that's the two major hindrances, I would say, is on the one hand the charging challenge I talked about now, and on the other hand some kind of awareness topic, because for many people it's still not thinkable that they will drive an electric car in the future. For them it's some kind of nerdy or strange thing to do, but I think it's comparable to the process of phones. We had our normal phones, and then suddenly the smartphones came on the market, and then slowly, but then in a short time, everybody had a smartphone because they saw it's much more convenient. And yeah, that's the two aspects, I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, Anela, thank you for your questions. Now we will go to Halima Hodzic again. Is Vienna doing anything to discourage the use of cars altogether? For example, removing traffic roads and creating car-free zones, taxing the use of cars in certain zones.
I have to say that this topic is very important, and for me it's something that follows me through my whole field of work. So it's some aspects are done and some are not done. So I have the impression that the the whole strategy of the city is more to incentivize eco-friendly forms of transport, such as providing new forms of public transport and sharing mobility. But it's really hard for the city to say, to make like cuts and to prohibit things and to tax things. So there were some discussions about having a city tax, but then it was dropped. And then there were some discussions about having a car-free inner center, so that the first district should be made car-free, but that was a real huge political discussion as well, and it was dropped. So what we do is making neighborhood areas more people-friendly and have less cars in installing encountering zones, we call it. So it's zones where you have to reduce your speed as a car driver down to 30 kilometers per hour, and then you have street is constructed in a flat way, so you don't have those curb zone areas, and everybody can use the street in the same manner. So that therefore it's called encountering zones. So it means that the rights of walkers and cyclists and drivers should be given in the same way, but it's only for like small areas in town. For example, the most popular is the Marie-Hilfer-Straße, which is a huge shopping area, and there were big discussions about if it's possible to do that, because you need the parking spaces there. But in the end, it showed up that the street now is much more livable than it was before. It's much more frequented, and you have sitting possibilities and recreational areas, more trees and stuff like that. And what we also do is that the parking zones, they will be extended this year or next year from the inner districts to the whole city. So because we see now that the outer districts are now used by commuters, by people come from outside the city and they park the car everywhere in the outer districts for free, and then the inhabitants there, for them it's hard to find a parking spot. So I would say those are the most important measures at the moment, but there is still some space to do improvements on that, but it's always depending on the current city government and political situation. We had a green government, a green traffic responsible person in the last decade. Now we have again a social democratic. They are a bit more cautious on doing such things. But what we can see from different cities all over Europe, that it's a huge thing to make cities more livable, more green, reduce car traffic, improve the cycling conditions, and so on.
Great, thank you. We have one more question. I hope you're not too much tired, Gerald.
No, it's fine.
we have lots of issues in our heads, so this is great, really. My question is more, let's say, social issue related. Sorry if it's off topic. It concerns e-car battery technology. We see that the range is improving. However, I believe that the technology is not there yet in terms of wear and tear. So the question is, with the internal combustion engine cars, the customers can potentially drive the same car for 10 to 15 years. Why would an average consumer optimal to buy e-car, other than obvious environmental benefits? If the lifespan is potentially short, the car is more expensive, and I would assume that repair costs of these vehicles are higher.
I mean, it's always dependent on what as a car driver you need and you want to have. What we can see from data is in Austria, and I guess in your country it's not very different, that most of the travels done by car are shorter than 50 kilometers a day. So it's only in some occasions that you need the car for doing a holiday, go on your vacation for longer distances. But in the normal use of a car, you know that that the short distances and middle distances are the main trips done by car, and therefore the electric car is the perfect use because it's totally sufficient to have an electric car with a current battery technology to use to do your travels with it, and you can see that it's a lot cheaper than using a combustion engine car. So, for example, the full load of a battery in an electric car costs you about €7. So it's 7-8 euros depending on the electricity price, but it's a lot cheaper than the gasoline price. And on the other hand, what we can see is that the repair costs are a lot lower. So we can see that you don't have those kind of service and maintenance intensive care on electric cars that you have with normal fossil fuel cars. For example, changing oil, changing filters, changing this and that mechanical parts are not needed with an electric car. So from users, we see they save a lot of costs concerning maintenance, because the only thing you have to do is to change the tires from summer to winter tires, but then that's about it. Yeah. And concerning the lifespan of electric cars, it's a bit unknown because it's a new market. What we can see from the first models, such as Teslas from the first generation, we see that their lifespan is a lot longer, also the duration of the battery than it was expected before. So it's easily you can drive those cars for about 8 years or 9 years or 10 years, maybe not for 10 to 15 years as you mentioned, but in Austria most people are not driving a car for 10 to 15 years. Normally they exchange the cars in a shorter span of time, so which is also not very environmentally friendly, but it's also, as a status symbol, and if people can afford it, they do it. So, and there's a lot of leasing. So I would say the advantages of the electric car in that aspect is really visible. I hope that answered my question, your question.
As I can see, Gerald, this is our last question. I don't know if anyone else, I'm checking now, raised the hand, so maybe someone has to say something additionally. If not, no, I'm not seeing it. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gerald, for this great webinar and for sharing knowledge and experience. Surely, I hope that our cooperation will continue in the future as well. For all participants, just information that the video will be available on the social media. So really, it was a great pleasure listening to you and to hear all these great stories from Vienna. And I hope you will visit us soon in Sarajevo.
Yeah, I would love to. I've never been there. So thank you very much, from my side as well. And thanks a lot for the invitation. It was really interesting and really good questions. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much, Gerald. We will be in touch, sure.
For sure. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.